Hello everyone. In this video we are going to focus on histogram and how it can be created using pandas and Matplotlib, and also how histograms are useful in summarizing a population and sometimes comparing populations together. So let's get to it and see how it's done. Okay, as usual we are going to import the modules we're going to be using, and also we're going to continue working on the China and US population data in 1965 and 2015. So we load the data. There are two ways you could be doing the histogram as far as writing out the code. You could directly call it from the Matplotlib library and say hist, the function hist that creates a histogram, and pass in the data that you want to be presented as a histogram. Once you run this, it will show you the histogram or the distribution of the values in that population. So you can see here, most of the population of China in 1965 their income were less than $1. And then you have very small portion between $1 to $2, and even smaller than that, greater than $2. You could have done the same thing by saying the China 1965 income, get all the way to the series, and use the function plot that is a property of this Pandas series to draw this histogram. So you could do that this way too and say, I want to plot, the kind of plot I want to use is hist. And it will draw the same plot for you. There are a couple of things that you could be changing about histogram. The first one is how the histogram looks like. So there are two types of them. There is one that are bar, and the other one is a step. Basically, bar is a traditional bar type histogram, what we are seeing here, and step sort of generates one line to sort of represent the population. As far as the visual and as far as like showing the data, they are identical, but the way that they are shown might be a little bit different. So let's see both of them and see how they work. So I have created a list of the possible option. One is bar, the other one is step, and I go through that option list through a loop, and every time I have my hist type or histogram type, I pass one of those options, which comes from either bar or step. So once I run this, this is bar histogram, the same as before. This is the step one. You can see the data that they are showing is actually very similar. But what's different is this is just produce one line. This is sort of like shows as like charts, sort of bar charts that are close to one another. Another thing you want to pay attention to is that the difference between this figure and this one is the fact that now I'm using the log of income, log of 10 income. As we talked about this, when you use a log of an attribute, you're basically saying the extreme low and the extreme high, I don't want them to be that extreme. By doing a log, you sort of like scale down on the unit or on the scale, high scale of an attribute. So that's why we have done this here. And you can sort of compare them and see actually the shape of the distribution changes, and instead of having like a very concentrated part in very close to zero, now you have this normal looking distribution here. Another thing that is very important when you create histograms is the number of bars you want to have here, or basically the number of bins that you want to create. If you don't specify it, Matplotlib will choose one that makes sense to the algorithm, and but you have a choice to select that. And the way you can do this is by setting bins the number that you want to be used as the number of bins. So I have created a bunch of options here from 5 all the way to 100 with the step of 5. So I'm going to be experimenting with 5, 10, 15, 20 all the way to 100 and see which one will look better for the purpose of our analysis. So once I run this, now I start getting different bar charts. So you can see here I have 5 bin here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then I have 10 bins here. As you can see, as I'm scrolling down, the level of details that are shown in these visuals are changing and are increasing. So I have more and more details that are shown here. And really finding out what is the right amount of bins is a question over simplicity and also keeping as much information as possible. So some of these are actually too much. I mean, we can see that we are now picking up very minute details that are not really patterns there. So these are definitely too much bins. But how low we want to go is really a subjective question to answer. So I think doing something like 45, 40 based on my observation here, based on the amount of details I'm picking up on, sounds reasonable. So let's go with 45. So we are going to be working with 45 from here on. And so this is going to be the visual that we're going to be looking at. And that's now we are looking at the steps. So this is the same visual, but now we're looking at the type of steps. A lot of times when we do a histogram, we also want to create some points in the histogram that represent the mean and different quantile in the histogram that tells us how much of the data or where the central tendency in the data is. So here I am adding an XV line that basically add a line to the visual here, and I'm saying I want the mean of the log 10 income for China 1965 to be added here using the color C1. So once I run this, now the mean of the population is also added here. So I could be using this to also add the median. So now I'm also adding the median with another color. So once I run this, now I have the mean and the median shown here. So I can see the median is a little bit higher than the mean, which means that my normal distribution, or if it's normal distribution, is a little bit lopsided towards the right. It's skewed towards the right. And also I could be adding the quantile, a different quantile of the data. So now I'm adding the 25% and 75% quantile here. And once I run this, now I look at, I have the sort of summary of the population, but also I have the mean and the median. Also, I know 50% of my population is in between these two quantiles. So the challenge I have for you is basically redraw this visual. But this time, I want you to draw those two extra lines that we draw here. Now I want you to make sure that 95% of the data is enclosed between those two lines. Give this a try and come back as we continue on seeing how this is done. So the only thing that you really have to change is changing those numbers from 25 and 75 to 0.975 and 0.025. Pay attention here. You don't want these numbers to be 0.95 and 0.05, because that would be 90% of your data there, not 95%. So once I run this, now I can see that this is my visual, this is my histogram, and I know 95% of my data is between -1 and around -1 to positive perhaps 2. And that's very informative for this population. One of the other things that we could be using histogram for is to compare populations, and it's fairly simple. All you need to do is to draw histograms on top of one another and sort of see the differences in the population by just way of looking at it. Now we can see the comparison between the population of China and US in 1965, and you can see that the lowest, or like the very lowest value in the US were sort of the highest values in China in 1965. And this visual does much more than just looking at two means or standard deviation. It's a very nice way of comparing between two populations, see how similar, different, and how they are interacting with each other with histogram.